Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we're leaving behind the noise of modern life. No buzzing phones. No traffic. No overflowing email inboxes. Instead, we're traveling back nearly 800 years to a tiny medieval village, where life moved at the steady pace of walking feet, creaking wagons, and the endless turning of a water wheel. Settle into a comfortable position. Take a slow, deep breath. There's nowhere you need to be except here. Tonight, we'll spend our time with one of the hardest working and strangely overlooked people in medieval Europe, the village miller. If you've ever imagined the Middle Ages as a world of shining knights, towering castles, or dramatic battles, tonight's story may surprise you. Most people never saw a castle. Most never met a knight. Instead, they lived ordinary lives centered around farming, seasons, weather, and survival. And almost every one of those lives depended on one building: the mill. Without flour, there was no bread. Without bread, there was very little to eat. And without the miller, well, an entire village could quickly find itself in serious trouble. Ironically, despite performing one of the most essential jobs in medieval society, millers weren't always trusted. Songs joked about them. Travelers complained about them. Priests occasionally warned people not to become too greedy like them. Yet every morning, before the first rooster had even decided whether it felt like crowing, the miller was already awake. Let's imagine one of those mornings. The year is around 1275, somewhere in rural England. The air is cold enough that every breath becomes a tiny white cloud. Mist hangs low over damp fields. Tiny cottages sit quietly beneath roofs of straw. The village still sleeps, except for one person, the miller. He rises long before sunrise. His house is built close to the mill itself, because emergencies never wait until convenient hours. A broken wheel, a flooded stream, a snapped wooden gear, a farmer arriving unexpectedly with grain. Any of these could happen before breakfast. He dresses quickly. His clothes aren't especially comfortable. Rough wool scratches against his skin. Leather shoes have already been repaired so many times they barely resemble the originals. There is no hot shower waiting. No fresh coffee. Breakfast might simply be yesterday's bread dipped in weak ale. Believe it or not, ale was often safer than water. Many medieval water supplies weren't particularly clean. Small beer or weak ale contained very little alcohol, but was commonly consumed throughout the day. Outside, darkness still blankets the countryside. Only the stars and a thin crescent moon provide enough light to find the path toward the mill. As he approaches, one sound slowly grows louder. Creak, splash, groan, splash. The wheel has been turning through most of the night. It never truly sleeps. Its rhythm is almost hypnotic. Steady, predictable, comforting, and completely unforgiving. Because if that wheel stops turning unexpectedly, dozens of families may not receive their flour on time. The mill itself smells unlike almost anywhere else. Fresh cut timber, wet stone, ground grain, old flour, a faint scent of damp moss drifting in through open wooden doors. Soon, farmers begin arriving. Some have walked for hours. Others lead tired horses pulling wooden carts. Each carries sacks of grain harvested months earlier. Wheat, barley, oats, sometimes rye. Every sack represents months of labor. Fields plowed by hand. Seeds scattered carefully. Wheats pulled one by one. Harvest completed using simple iron sickles. The grain is precious. The miller knows this, which is exactly why everyone watches him so carefully. One of the oldest complaints about medieval millers was that they secretly kept a little extra grain for themselves. This practice became so famous that it even appeared in jokes, poems, and folk tales. Was every miller dishonest? Probably not. But the reputation stuck. Imagine bringing your family's entire food supply to someone else and hoping they return almost all of it. Trust wasn't optional. It was essential. As the first sack is lifted toward the grinding stones, real work begins. The upper millstone weighs hundreds of pounds, sometimes even more than 1,000. Despite that incredible weight, it must rotate smoothly over another stone beneath it. The gap between them is astonishingly important. Too close, and the flour burns or becomes too fine. Too far apart, and whole grains slip through nearly untouched. The miller constantly adjusts the stones using experience rather than precise measurements. There are no digital gauges, no instruction manuals, only years of listening, feeling, watching. He knows the sound of healthy grinding. He knows when the stones begin vibrating differently. He notices tiny changes most visitors would never hear. Grinding grain creates enormous amounts of dust. Within an hour, the miller's beard, eyebrows, sleeves, and boots all appear white. By midday, he almost resembles a ghost. Fine flour floats everywhere. It settles into hair, inside sleeves, inside boots, into every wrinkle of clothing. Every breath carries tiny particles into his lungs. No protective masks exist. No ventilation systems remove the dust. For years, decades, the miller breathes flour every single day. His shoulders ache from lifting sacks. Many weigh more than 100 pounds. He cannot simply roll them onto modern conveyor belts. Every movement depends on muscle. Wooden pulleys help. Gravity helps. Occasionally another worker helps. But mostly, it's simply hard work. The water outside never completely obeys him either. Too much rain causes flooding. Too little rain slows the wheel. Winter freezes channels. Summer dries streams. The miller's business depends entirely upon nature behaving itself. Nature rarely agrees. While waiting for flour, villagers chat nearby. Children chase chickens. Dogs sniff spilled grain. Someone complains about taxes. Someone else worries about next year's harvest. Life continues around the mill because the mill isn't merely a workplace. It's the village's unofficial meeting place. News spreads here. Rumors begin here. Arguments start here. Friendships strengthen here. Occasionally, marriages begin here as well. And through it all, the wheel keeps turning. Slowly, patiently, hour after hour. Its rhythm has remained unchanged for generations. Long before this miller was born, another stood exactly where he now stands. Long after he is gone, another will likely replace him. History often celebrates kings. It remembers generals. It builds statues for conquerors. But civilizations survive because ordinary people quietly perform extraordinary amounts of work. Few are more ordinary, or more essential, than the medieval miller. So as the gentle sound of the turning wheel fills the cool morning air, and flour drifts like soft white snow through narrow beams of sunlight, you may begin to understand why this seemingly simple profession demanded patience, strength, endurance, and remarkable skill. And we've only just begun our very long day. The eastern sky is only beginning to lighten. A thin ribbon of pale gold appears beyond the distant hills, and the morning mist slowly loosens its grip on the fields. Tiny droplets of dew cling to every blade of grass, sparkling for a brief moment before the warmth of the coming day gently erases them. Inside the mill, however, the day is already well underway. The steady rumble of the grinding stones never seems hurried. They turn with remarkable patience, as though they have all the time in the world. Stone presses against stone with a deep, reassuring sound that has echoed through this valley for generations. The miller hardly notices it anymore. For him, the sound has become as ordinary as breathing. In fact, complete silence would worry him far more. A sudden stop in the machinery could mean dozens of different problems. Perhaps a branch had drifted into the water wheel. Perhaps one of the wooden teeth inside the gears had snapped. Perhaps the flow of water had slowed overnight. Or perhaps something much worse had happened. Wood, after all, is a wonderful building material. It is also surprisingly eager to wear out. Every turning wheel slowly grinds away at its own parts. Every gear loses tiny fragments of itself. Every axle creaks just a little louder than it did yesterday. The miller knows this. He expects it. Long before anyone speaks to him that morning, he has already walked around the building several times, placing a rough hand on wooden beams, listening carefully for unfamiliar noises. To an outsider, everything sounds exactly the same. To the miller, every tiny change tells a story. A slightly higher squeak, a slower rhythm, a deeper vibration beneath his boots. Each one is a clue. Modern mechanics might use precision instruments. The medieval miller has only experience. Years of it. His tools are simple. A wooden mallet, iron wedges, ropes, grease made from animal fat, a handful of carefully carved replacement pegs. Nothing looks especially impressive. Yet these humble tools keep one of the village's most important machines alive. Outside, another farmer arrives. He has walked since before dawn. His horse looks almost as tired as he does. The sacks hanging across its back contain wheat harvested months ago and stored carefully through the winter. Storage itself is never easy. Grain attracts mice. It attracts rats. It attracts insects. Moisture can ruin an entire harvest before anyone notices. Every family guards its grain with extraordinary care. Losing even a small amount can mean the difference between comfort and hunger before the next harvest. The farmer removes one heavy sack from the horse with a tired sigh. The miller nods. No elaborate greetings. No unnecessary conversation. There is simply too much work waiting. The sack is weighed. Not with digital scales, of course. Instead, balances and counterweights help estimate the amount. Absolute precision isn't always possible. There is simply too much work waiting. The sack is weighed. Not with digital scales, of course. Instead, balances and counterweights help estimate the amount. Absolute precision isn't always possible. Disagreements occasionally happen. In fact, they happen rather often. Some farmers quietly believe the miller's scales are generous. Mostly toward the miller. The miller insists they are fair. Who is correct? History suggests both sides probably exaggerated from time to time. People have always been suspicious whenever someone else measures their property. Some things never change. As the wheat disappears into the hopper above the grinding stones, gravity takes over. One by one, the grains slip downward. They disappear between the enormous stones. A moment later, soft flour begins emerging below like pale drifting snow. Freshly ground flour has a surprisingly pleasant smell. Nutty, warm, earthy. Nothing like the perfectly uniform white flour found in modern supermarkets. This flour still contains tiny fragments of bran, small variations in texture, occasional flecks of darker grain. It is alive with the character of the harvest itself. The miller scoops up a handful. He rubs it between weathered fingers. Too coarse. He adjusts the stone. Only slightly. The change is almost invisible. The sound changes first. Then the texture. Better. Much better. This tiny adjustment may save an entire day's production. Such decisions happen constantly. Hundreds of them. No written handbook teaches these skills. They pass from one generation to another. Father to son. Master to apprentice. Years of observation become instinct. By mid-morning the sunlight reaches through narrow wooden windows, creating bright columns filled with floating flour dust. The particles dance lazily in the air. For a brief moment, the mill almost looks magical. Tiny white stars drifting through beams of golden light. Beautiful. Peaceful. Until someone sneezes. Then everyone remembers exactly how much flour is floating around. The miller laughs quietly. He's sneezed so often over the years that he hardly notices anymore. His apprentice, however, is having a much harder time. The young boy cannot be older than 14. His arms are still growing. His hands are covered with fresh blisters. Today he is learning one of the least glamorous jobs inside the mill. Sweeping. No matter how carefully people work, flour collects everywhere. On beams. On windowsills. Between floorboards. Around the machinery. If ignored, the dust becomes slippery. It attracts moisture. It encourages pests. Keeping the mill clean is endless work. The apprentice sweeps one corner. By lunchtime, another layer has already appeared. The miller smiles knowingly. Some jobs are never truly finished. Outside, village life slowly becomes louder. Blacksmiths begin hammering iron. Children chase each other along muddy paths. Women carry buckets from the village well. Smoke rises gently from cottage chimneys. Dogs bark at absolutely nothing. Roosters finally decide that now is an excellent time to announce the arrival of morning, even though everyone has been awake for hours. The smell of baking bread drifts across the village. Ironically, the miller rarely has time to enjoy it while it's still warm. Work comes first. Meals fit into whatever moments remain. If moments remain at all. His breakfast may still be waiting exactly where he left it. A piece of coarse bread. Perhaps a small wedge of cheese. Maybe an onion. If fortune has smiled on the household recently, there might even be a little smoked bacon. Nothing extravagant. Just enough to keep working. Because stopping completely is difficult. Every farmer waiting outside hopes to return home before sunset. Every delay matters. Especially during harvest season. Some days the line of wagons stretches far beyond the mill itself. Patients in a doctor's waiting room today might recognize the feeling. Everyone believes their turn should come just a little sooner. The miller hears the complaints with remarkable patience. He has heard them for 20 years. He will probably hear them for another 20. One farmer insists he arrive first. Another insists his grain is more urgent. A third quietly suggests that perhaps an extra coin might encourage faster service. The miller pretends not to hear that last comment. Officially, everything must remain fair. Unofficially, human nature has always been wonderfully complicated. As the sun climbs higher into the sky, the water wheel continues its endless turning. Splash. Creak. Groan. Splash. The rhythm never changes. And neither, it seems, does the work. There are still many sacks waiting by the door. Many hours before sunset. Many careful adjustments still to make. For the medieval miller, the morning has barely begun. And already, it feels as though he has lived an entire day. By the time the sun hangs comfortably above the fields, the village has settled into its familiar rhythm. The cows have already been led to pasture. The chickens have scattered in every imaginable direction. Smoke rises lazily from cottage chimneys, drifting upward into a sky that has finally lost its morning haze. Inside the mill, however, it is impossible to describe the atmosphere as peaceful. From a distance, the building appears calm enough. A large wooden wheel turns steadily beside the stream. The wall stands solidly in place. Nothing seems hurried. But step through the heavy oak doorway, and another world greets you entirely. The first thing you notice is the sound. Not one sound. Hundreds. The grinding stones produce a deep, steady rumble. The gears click together with surprising precision. Wooden shafts groan under tremendous pressure. The water wheel splashes endlessly outside. Ropes creak. Buckets scrape across rough wooden floors. Voices echo against thick timber beams. And somewhere, almost certainly, someone is coughing after breathing far too much flour. It is difficult to hold an ordinary conversation. People naturally begin speaking louder. After years inside the mill, many older millers likely developed poor hearing. No one knew anything about hearing protection. The only solution was simply to lean closer and repeat yourself. Fortunately, medieval conversations rarely involved discussing complicated computer passwords. The miller walks toward the center of the building, where the great wooden gears slowly revolve. They are magnificent in their simplicity. No electricity. No steam. No engines. Only flowing water. It is easy to forget just how extraordinary this is. A stream that has been flowing down the hillside for thousands of years is quietly performing work that would otherwise require several strong men turning heavy cranks from sunrise until sunset. Nature supplies the energy. The mill simply borrows it. Each gear has been carefully carved by skilled hands. Every tooth must fit neatly into the next wheel. Too loose, and valuable energy is lost. Too tight, and the machinery wears itself down much faster. Creating these gears requires remarkable craftsmanship. A village carpenter might spend weeks producing a single replacement. And replacements are always needed eventually. Wood expands when it becomes damp. It shrinks as it dries. Tiny cracks slowly appear. Years of constant pressure eventually defeat even the strongest oak. The miller keeps spare pegs and wedges close at hand. Not because something is broken today, because something might break today. Experience has taught him that preparing for disaster is much easier than responding to one. His apprentice is learning this lesson as well. The young boy watches carefully as the miller kneels beside one of the gears. "There!" the older man says quietly. The apprentice squints. At first, he sees nothing unusual. Just wood. Then, after several moments, he notices it. One tooth has begun wearing unevenly. Only a little. Barely enough for anyone else to notice. But to the miller, it stands out immediately. "If we ignore it," he explains, "it becomes tomorrow's problem. Tomorrow's problem eventually becomes next month's disaster." The apprentice nods. It is an excellent lesson, not only for mills, for almost everything in life. The worn section is smoothed carefully with simple hand tools. Not perfect. Just better. Sometimes better is all that history allows. Outside, another wagon arrives. This one belongs to a wealthier farmer. His horse is larger. His cart sturdier. His grain cleaner. Good harvests often begin with good soil, but they also depend upon luck. Too much rain ruins crops. Too little rain ruins crops. Unexpected frost ruins crops. Insects ruin crops. Disease ruins crops. A successful harvest always feels like a small miracle. The farmer greets the miller warmly. They have known each other for years, perhaps decades. In villages this small, everyone knows everyone else's habits. Who wakes early? Who pays debts promptly? Who tells stories longer than necessary? Who always complains about the weather, regardless of whether it is sunny or raining? The miller has heard every complaint before. The roads are muddy. The taxes are unfair. The Lord demands too much grain. The sheep have wandered again. Someone's pig escaped. Again. Remarkably little changes from one season to the next. The faces grow older. Children become adults. Adults become grandparents. Yet the conversations remain wonderfully familiar. Near the entrance, several women wait patiently while their grain is processed. Waiting is simply another ordinary part of medieval life. People wait for bread. They wait for harvest. They wait for markets. They wait for better weather. There is very little rushing. Travel itself is slow. A journey of 20 miles might consume an entire day. No one expects instant results. As they wait, conversations drift from one topic to another. A coming festival. A recent wedding. A traveling merchant who passed through the village 2 days earlier. Someone claims he saw spices from lands beyond the sea. Another insists the merchant exaggerated everything. Travelers often do. Stories become larger every time they are retold. By the fifth version, the merchant may have wrestled a bear while crossing the Alps. No one can prove otherwise. The apprentice listens eagerly. He has never traveled farther than the nearest market town. To him, the wider world sounds almost mythical. Castles, great cities, ships larger than entire villages, kings, universities, cathedrals whose towers disappear into the clouds. Meanwhile, the miller continues working. He has heard such stories all his life. Interesting, certainly. But stories do not grind flour. As the afternoon approaches, sunlight pours through the windows in bright golden beams. The flour floating in the air glitters softly. For just a moment, the mill resembles the inside of a snow globe that someone has gently shaken. Beautiful though it may be, the dust creates another problem. Fire. Dry flour suspended in the air can burn with astonishing speed if exposed to a spark. The medieval miller does not understand the chemistry behind this danger. He simply knows that open flames do not belong near flour. Lamps are used carefully. Candles are watched constantly. One careless mistake could reduce years of hard work to ashes. Wood burns eagerly. Flour feeds flames. Strong winds spread them. Entire villages have disappeared because of accidents far smaller than anyone expected. The miller respects fire. Perhaps even fears it. That caution has probably saved his livelihood more than once. The apprentice finishes sweeping for what feels like the 100th time today. He leans against a beam for only a few seconds. Immediately the miller notices. Not with anger, only with quiet amusement. "Tired already?" he asks. The boy smiles sheepishly. "A little?" The older man laughs softly. "Good." The apprentice looks confused. "If you're tired before noon," the miller says, "you're working properly." It is not meant as cruelty, simply observation. Hard work has always left honest people exhausted. The water wheel continues turning outside. The stream never pauses. Neither, it seems, does the work inside. There are still sacks to lift, stones to adjust, customers to greet, dust to sweep, repairs to make. And somewhere beyond the fields, another farmer is already walking toward the mill with a heavy sack balanced across his shoulders, hoping to arrive before the day's light begins to fade. For the medieval miller, there is rarely such a thing as finished. There is only today's work, followed quietly by tomorrow's. The afternoon sun hangs high above the village now. The cool freshness of the morning has disappeared, replaced by gentle warmth that settles over the fields like a soft blanket. In the distance, insects hum quietly among the tall grasses. A pair of swallows swoop effortlessly through the air, chasing one another above the stream that powers the mill. From outside, it looks like a peaceful summer day. Inside the mill, every muscle in the miller's body is beginning to disagree. The first few sacks of grain each morning are manageable. Heavy, certainly, but manageable. By the 20th sack, everything changes. His shoulders ache. His lower back complains with every bend. The palms of his hands, already rough from years of work, feel sore beneath the coarse fabric of the grain bags. Each sack weighs somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds, depending on its contents. Some are packed with wheat, Others contain rye or barley. A few carry oats, lighter but no less awkward to handle. None of them have convenient handles. None are perfectly balanced. The cloth shifts unexpectedly as the grain settles inside. Every lift requires care. Lift too quickly, and the weight twists your back. Lift carelessly, and the sack may tear open. That would be disastrous. Not because someone would become angry, because every grain matters. Today, it is easy to think of flour as something inexpensive. A simple bag from a grocery store. In the 13th century, flour represented months of labor. A family had prepared the field, plowed the soil behind an ox, sowed every seed by hand, pulled weeds beneath the hot summer sun, protected the crop from birds, waited anxiously through storms, harvested each stalk with a sickle, bound it into sheaves, dried it, stored it. Finally, after all those months, it arrived here. To spill even a portion onto the floor felt almost painful. The miller understands this better than anyone. Whenever a few kernels escape, he instinctively bends to gather them. Not because he is miserly, because waste is a luxury very few people can afford. His apprentice watches carefully. The young boy has become stronger already. Only a few months ago, lifting a full sack required every ounce of his effort. Now he manages many of them alone. His movements are still awkward, but improving. Strength comes slowly. Technique comes even more slowly. The miller offers advice without speaking much. He demonstrates instead. Use your legs. Keep the sack close. Do not twist. Simple lessons. Remarkably timeless. A modern warehouse worker might recognize every one of them. Some wisdom never grows old. Outside, another customer approaches on foot. Unlike many others, he owns no horse. His grain is carried in two smaller sacks suspended from a wooden pole balanced across his shoulders. The journey has taken hours. His boots are muddy. His clothes are patched. Yet he smiles politely as he reaches the doorway. The miller returns the greeting with equal warmth. Life in a medieval village often depended upon quiet respect between neighbors. Arguments happened, of course, sometimes spectacular ones, but cooperation mattered more. One difficult winter could remind everyone how much they relied upon one another. The farmer removes his cap and wipes sweat from his forehead. It has been a warm walk. The miller nods. It will be a warmer walk home. Both men laugh softly, not because the joke is especially clever, because small moments of humor make long days easier. As the grain begins its familiar journey through the millstones, the farmer settles onto a nearby bench. There is little else to do except wait. Waiting has become something of an art in medieval life. There are no newspapers, no radios, no glowing screens tucked into pockets. Conversation fills the empty hours instead. The farmer asks whether the nearby river has flooded this spring. The miller says only once. Fortunately, no serious damage. Another customer joins the conversation. He mentions wolves seen near the forest several nights earlier. Nobody appears terribly surprised. Wolves are simply part of the landscape. Respected, occasionally feared, rarely discussed with dramatic excitement. The conversation drifts naturally toward the harvest. It almost always does. The harvest determines nearly everything. Whether bread will be plentiful, whether prices will rise, whether taxes will feel especially burdensome, whether families will have enough to carry them through winter. A poor harvest shadows every conversation. A good harvest brightens every face. The miller listens while continuing to work. He contributes only occasionally. His attention remains fixed upon the machinery. He notices the hopper emptying, adds another measure of grain, adjusts the flow, checks the flour, feels the vibration beneath his boots. Without realizing it, he performs dozens of tiny inspections every hour. Experience has transformed them into habit. No one trained him with written instructions. He simply watched. For years. As a boy, he observed an older miller making these same small movements. At first, they seemed meaningless. Why touch that beam? Why pause beside that gear? Why place a hand against the millstone? Only later did he understand. Every action gathered information. A vibration felt through wood. A warmth inside an axle. A faint smell of overheated timber. Long before machines announced their problems with warning lights, skilled workers learned to notice subtler signs. The apprentice is beginning to learn this language too. He closes his eyes for a moment. Not to rest. To listen. The mill sounds different now than it did this morning. The wheel turns a little faster. The stream has risen slightly. The stones produce a deeper tone beneath the heavier grain. The apprentice cannot yet explain the difference. But he hears it. That is the beginning. Late in the afternoon, clouds begin gathering over the western hills. Nothing threatening. Just soft gray shapes drifting lazily across the sky. The miller notices them immediately. Rain changes everything. A gentle shower may increase the stream by tomorrow morning. A violent storm might send logs crashing downstream into the water wheel. Too much water can be almost as troublesome as too little. Nature rarely provides exactly the amount anyone hopes for. The wind shifts. Cooler air slips through the open doorway. The smell of damp earth arrives before the rain itself. Somewhere outside, thunder murmurs so quietly that it almost sounds like another turning millstone. Customers glance toward the sky. Several decide it is time to leave. Their sacks of freshly ground flour are tied securely onto carts and shoulders. Goodbyes are exchanged. Promises to meet again next week. News to share with relatives. A reminder about the village fair next month. One by one, they disappear down the muddy road. The mill slowly grows quieter. Not silent. It is never truly silent. But quieter. The apprentice stretches his aching arms. His shirt is coated in flour from collar to boots. If someone met him now, they might mistake him for a baker. The miller looks little different. His beard has turned almost completely white, not with age, but with flour. He brushes at it absent-mindedly. The flour simply settles somewhere else. After a while, one learns not to fight it. Outside, the first raindrops finally begin to fall. They strike the roof in a slow, gentle rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The stream welcomes every drop. Tomorrow, the water wheel may turn just a little more easily. For now, though, the day is not over. Not even close. The customers may be leaving. The lifting may finally be slowing. But the mill itself still demands attention. Because before the miller can sleep, he must prepare the entire building to begin all over again tomorrow. The last customer disappears around the bend in the road. For a few quiet moments, the only movement outside is the gentle rain falling across the fields. The wagon tracks slowly fill with water. The village grows noticeably quieter. A shepherd whistles in the distance. Somewhere beyond the trees, a church bell marks the late afternoon. 1, 2, 3. Its sound rolls softly across the countryside before fading into the damp air. Inside the mill, you might imagine the work is finally finished. After all, there are no more farmers waiting with sacks of grain. No line of wagons. No impatient customers. No voices filling the room. Surely this is the moment when the miller sits down with a warm meal and enjoys a well-earned rest. Not quite. In fact, many experienced millers would tell you that this is when some of the most important work of the day truly begins. During the long hours of grinding, the mill has been slowly wearing itself out. Every rotation of the great stones has created friction. Every turning gear has rubbed against another. Every wooden peg has absorbed countless tiny shocks. The machinery has worked just as hard as the people. And like the people, it deserves attention. The miller walks slowly around the building. Not because he is tired, although he certainly is. He walks slowly because he is inspecting everything. His fingers slide across smooth oak beams polished by decades of use. He presses gently against wooden supports. He pauses beside each gear, listening with patient concentration. To anyone else, the mill sounds perfectly ordinary. To him, it speaks. One axle hums a little lower than yesterday. A bearing feels warmer than it should. A peg has shifted ever so slightly. None of these are emergencies. Not yet. But tomorrow, they might become one. He reaches into a small wooden chest that sits beneath a workbench. Inside are the tools of his trade. Not elegant. Not expensive. Simply reliable. A small hammer with a polished wooden handle. Iron chisels darkened with age. Wooden wedges carved during quiet winter evenings. Bundles of leather straps. A coil of rope. Several carefully shaped replacement pegs. Every item has its place. Nothing is wasted. If a tool breaks, it is repaired. If it cannot be repaired, parts of it are used for something else. In the medieval world, throwing useful things away is almost unthinkable. Even worn-out rope may find a second life tying bundles of firewood. Even broken wooden buckets become kindling. The apprentice watches quietly. He expected the day's labor to end when the customers left. Instead, he discovers another lesson. Machines require care. Neglect is expensive. The older miller kneels beside one of the great gears. "This peg," he says softly. The apprentice looks closely. It appears perfectly ordinary. The miller smiles. "Exactly." With gentle taps from the hammer, he removes it. Only now does the apprentice notice a long crack running through its center. Another week, perhaps another month, and it would almost certainly have failed. A new peg slides neatly into place. The repair takes only a few minutes. Preventing disaster often does. Fixing disaster, that is another matter entirely. Outside, the rain becomes steadier. Water splashes from the roof into muddy puddles below. The stream, which has faithfully powered the mill all day, begins to flow just a little faster. The water wheel turns with renewed enthusiasm. Creak, splash, groan, splash. The rhythm has become so familiar that it almost resembles breathing. Steady, comforting, endless. The miller steps outside beneath the overhanging roof. He studies the wheel carefully. Its paddles disappear beneath the rushing water before emerging again, dripping steadily. He examines each spoke, each joint, each iron band holding the wheel together. Water is both friend and enemy. Without it, the mill stands still. With too much of it, the wheel may be torn apart. Finding balance is part of the job. Much of medieval life depends upon understanding nature rather than attempting to control it. The apprentice joins him. "Will it rain all night?" The miller shrugs. "The clouds know." It is a sensible answer. Weather forecasts do not exist. There are only observations. The smell of the air. The direction of the wind. The shape of the clouds. Sometimes these clues are remarkably accurate. Sometimes they are completely wrong. Nature enjoys surprising people. Back inside, sweeping begins once again. Flour has settled over nearly every surface. It gathers along windowsills, between floorboards, on rafters high above. Even the beams supporting the roof wear a fine white coating. The apprentice pushes the broom steadily across the floor. Clouds of flour rise with every stroke. Within moments, both boys, and yes, Despite his age, the miller probably still feels like a boy after such a long day, are covered once again in a pale dust. It seems almost impossible to become cleaner while cleaning. The miller chuckles. The flour always wins. The apprentice laughs. He is beginning to understand. Some tasks are not completed. They are simply repeated. Every day. Every season. Every year. As evening approaches, the light inside the mill changes. The bright golden sunshine has disappeared. Soft gray light filters through the narrow windows. Shadows stretch across the wooden floor. The great millstones seem larger now, almost ancient. They have probably outlived several generations of millers already. Stone does not hurry. Stone simply waits, patiently. One day, another miller will stand here, then another, and another still. The stones will continue turning long after today's apprentice becomes an old man. There is something strangely comforting about that thought. The work matters, even if the worker changes. Finally, after every tool has been returned to its place, after every loose peg has been inspected, after the floor has been swept, after tomorrow's grain has been stacked neatly near the entrance, the miller allows himself to sit. Only for a moment. A rough wooden stool waits beside the wall. It is hardly luxurious. No cushions. No carved decorations. Just sturdy oak polished smooth by years of use. He removes his cap. Runs a hand through hair now thoroughly coated with flour. His shoulders sink. The day's weight seems to settle all at once. Outside, the rain continues its quiet song against the roof. The stream answers below. The wheel turns steadily in the fading light. And for the first time since before dawn, the miller simply listens. No customers. No lifting. No repairs. Only the familiar sounds of the mill that has become, in many ways, an extension of himself. Tomorrow, before sunrise, those same sounds will welcome him back. And the entire day will begin again. Almost exactly as it did today. The grain will arrive. The stones will turn. The flour will drift through shafts of morning light. The village will gather. The work will continue. Quietly. Patiently. As it has for centuries. At last, the heavy door of the mill swings closed. Not with a dramatic thud. Just a slow, familiar creak that has probably sounded the same for decades. The rain has nearly stopped now. Only the occasional drop falls from the edge of the roof, landing in the puddles below with a gentle plop. The stream continues its steady journey through the valley, unconcerned with the hour. Water does not recognize weekends. It does not celebrate holidays. It simply keeps flowing. The miller pauses for a moment before walking home. His house stands only a short distance from the mill. That is no accident. A miller who lives several miles away would sleep very poorly indeed. If the water rose suddenly during the night, if a fallen tree struck the wheel, if thieves attempted to steal grain, if one of the gears jammed unexpectedly, he needed to know immediately. So the mill was not merely his workplace. It was his constant companion. Even at home, it was never entirely out of mind. The path between the mill and the cottage is muddy from the afternoon rain. His boots make a soft squelching sound with every step. Somewhere nearby, frogs have begun their evening chorus. Birdsong is fading now. The robins and sparrows that filled the morning with cheerful noise are settling into the hedgerows for the night. Instead, owls will soon take their place. The village itself has become quieter. Smoke curls lazily from the chimneys. The smell of wood fires hangs pleasantly in the damp evening air. It is the scent of supper. Simple, comforting, familiar. When the miller opens the door to his cottage, warmth greets him first. Not the overwhelming heat of a modern central heating system. just the cozy warmth of a fire that has burned steadily for hours. The room is modest, very modest. The floor is packed earth rather than polished wood. The walls are made of timber, and woven branches coated with clay. The ceiling beams are darkened by years of smoke from the hearth. Furniture is limited. A sturdy table, several stools, a wooden chest for valuable possessions, a few shelves holding pottery bowls, wooden spoons, and perhaps a treasured iron cooking pot. Nothing more is truly necessary. Every object has a purpose. Decoration is a luxury. Usefulness comes first. The miller's wife has been busy all day as well. Her work simply happened somewhere else. While the mill ground grain, she managed the household. She fetched water, prepared meals, tended the vegetable garden, fed chickens, mended clothing, watched young children if the family had them, collected eggs, perhaps brewed ale, perhaps spun wool into thread. Her day began before sunrise, too. It has been no less demanding. In many medieval households, everyone worked. Children worked. Parents worked. Grandparents worked as long as they could. There were few opportunities for idle afternoons. Survival required cooperation. The evening meal is waiting. No elaborate feast appears on the table. That happened only during festivals or extraordinary celebrations. Instead, supper is practical. A thick vegetable pottage simmers gently in an iron pot. It contains onions, leeks, cabbage, beans, perhaps carrots if the season has been kind. If fortune has smiled upon the family recently, there may be small pieces of bacon floating inside. Not enough to dominate the meal, just enough to flavor it. Bread accompanies nearly everything. Dense, dark, chewy. Nothing like the light, fluffy loaves many people enjoy today. This bread satisfies hunger. It is not trying to impress anyone. The miller tears off a piece. His hands are clean now, or at least considerably cleaner than they were an hour ago. Even after washing, traces of flour remain beneath his fingernails. Some habits follow a person home. He dips the bread into the steaming pottage. The warmth spreads through his tired body. For several moments, no one says very much. After a long day's work, silence can feel wonderfully comfortable. Eventually, conversation begins. Nothing particularly dramatic. A neighbor's cow wandered into someone's garden. Again, the blacksmith believes he can repair a broken plow before market day. A traveling merchant may arrive next week, perhaps, if the roads remain passable. The children, if there are children, eagerly describe events that seem incredibly important. A bird's nest discovered near the stream. A rabbit spotted beside the fields. A race that someone insists they absolutely won, despite several witnesses remembering the outcome differently. The adults smile. Some arguments are harmless. Outside, darkness settles over the countryside. Without electric lights, night transforms the world completely. The familiar road disappears into shadow. The fields become wide stretches of mystery. Only the moon and stars provide gentle illumination. On cloudy evenings, darkness can become almost complete. A single candle becomes surprisingly valuable. Candles themselves are expensive. Many ordinary families rely instead on small oil lamps or rushlights made from dried rushes dipped in animal fat. Their light is dim. Their smell is memorable. Modern scented candles they are not. The miller sits close to the hearth. His boots dry slowly beside the fire. Steam rises gently from the damp leather. He stretches his feet toward the warmth with a quiet sigh. His back feels stiff. His shoulders heavy. His hands bear tiny cuts collected throughout the day. No one thinks much about them. Minor injuries are simply part of working with wood, stone, rope, and grain. The apprentice may also join the household if he lives with the family. Many apprentices did. Learning a trade meant becoming part of another household for several years. The relationship resembled something between employment and family. The older miller taught skills. The apprentice offered labor. Along the way, both probably learned patience, especially when mistakes happened. And mistakes always happened. Tonight, after supper, there is still work to do. Clothing must be mended. Tools may need sharpening. Grain records, if they are kept, might require updating. Wood for tomorrow's fire must be stacked where it will remain reasonably dry. Nothing feels urgent. Everything simply needs doing. The fire crackles softly. Its warm glow dances across the walls, making shadows seem to move on their own. Outside, the village has fallen almost completely silent. No wagons. No shouting. No hammer striking iron. Only distant crickets. The occasional hoot of an owl. And somewhere beyond the cottage, barely audible through the night air, the gentle murmur of water continuing to flow beneath the great wheel of the mill. Even now, while the miller rests his wearied body, he cannot entirely forget that sound. Tomorrow morning, long before the sun climbs above the horizon, it will call him back once more. Another day. Another line of waiting farmers. Another mountain of grain. Another endless dance between wood, water, stone, and human effort. For now, however, there is one precious luxury left. Sleep. Not because every task has been completed. There are always more tasks. Not because tomorrow will be easier. It almost certainly will not. But because tired bodies, no matter how hard-working, eventually ask for nothing more than a warm fire, a full stomach, and a quiet place to close their eyes. The medieval miller understands this better than most. Within only a few hours, before the first hint of dawn touches the eastern sky, he will rise, pull on the same well-worn boots, open the same creaking door, and begin again. If you were to visit the village only once, on a pleasant summer afternoon, you might come away with a rather comforting impression. The stream flows peacefully. The water wheel turns without complaint. Birds sing from the hedgerows. The fields stretch toward the horizon in gentle shades of green and gold. The mill seems almost timeless, almost effortless. But that single afternoon would tell only a tiny part of the story. The medieval miller did not work in one season. He worked in all of them. And each season brought its own challenges, its own surprises, and its own entirely new collection of problems. Unlike many modern workplaces, the mill could not simply maintain the same routine month after month. Nature refused to cooperate with such neat planning. It preferred variety. Sometimes too much variety. Let us begin in spring. Winter has finally loosened its icy grip on the countryside. The first green shoots push through the damp soil. Trees cautiously begin to grow fresh leaves. The village breathes a quiet sigh of relief. Another winter has been survived. That alone is worth celebrating. For the miller, however, spring is a season of careful observation. Melting snow from distant hills and frequent rains feed the streams. Day by day, the water rises. At first, this seems like excellent news. More water means more power. The wheel turns with greater enthusiasm. Grinding becomes easier. The machinery seems almost eager to work. Then the rain continues, and continues. The cheerful stream slowly transforms into something much stronger. Branches appear first. Twigs and leaves carried downstream by the current. The miller removes them without much concern. Soon larger pieces arrive. Broken limbs. Entire logs. Occasionally, even the remains of a fallen tree. Each one threatens the great wheel. If a heavy log wedges itself between the paddles, the wheel may stop suddenly. The force of rushing water does not simply disappear. It pushes, relentlessly, with groans beneath the pressure. Iron bands strain. Sometimes the wheel survives. Sometimes expensive repairs follow. So during periods of heavy rain, the miller spends almost as much time watching the stream as he does grinding grain. His eyes constantly drift toward the water. Is it rising? Is it carrying debris? Has its color changed? Muddy water often tells a story. Somewhere upstream, the current is moving enough soil to color the entire stream. Nature is sending a quiet message. The miller has learned to listen. Eventually, spring settles into gentler weather. The floods pass. Wildflowers brighten the edges of the fields. Lambs appear in nearby pastures, wobbling uncertainly on impossibly thin legs. The village feels lighter somehow. Hope returns with the sunshine. Then comes summer. Long days. Warm evenings. Fields growing taller with every passing week. For many people, summer seems the easiest season. For the miller, not always. Streams sometimes shrink beneath weeks of hot weather. The lively current of spring becomes slower, shallower, more hesitant. The water wheel notices immediately. Its great paddles no longer receive the same powerful push. Instead of turning with confident strength, the wheel slows. Not dramatically at first, just enough for the miller to notice. He always notices. Grinding takes longer. Customers wait longer. The line outside grows longer. No one blames the stream. But everyone wishes it would hurry. Occasionally, the miller walks upstream searching for obstacles. Perhaps fallen branches are reducing the flow. Perhaps someone has diverted water to irrigate nearby fields. Water rights occasionally cause disagreements between neighbors. Nothing dramatic by Hollywood standards. Just ordinary disputes between practical people trying to earn a living. The stream belongs to everyone. And sometimes that means everyone argues about it. Summer also brings another challenge. Heat. Inside the mill, air barely moves. The turning stones create warmth. The machinery creates warmth. The afternoon sun heats the wooden walls. Combined with floating flour dust, the atmosphere becomes surprisingly uncomfortable. Sweat gathers beneath heavy wool clothing. The apprentice wipes his forehead for what feels like the 100th time. The miller hardly bothers anymore. There will simply be more sweat in another minute. Dust clings to damp skin. Flour sticks to eyebrows. Beards become pale once again. By evening, everyone resembles a baker who lost a disagreement with a sack of flour. Outside, farmers glance anxiously toward the sky. Rain is desperately needed. Every passing cloud receives careful attention. Will it bring relief? Or merely drift away? The answer determines more than comfort. It determines harvests. And harvests determine almost everything else. Then, almost without anyone noticing, summer begins to fade. The mornings become cooler. The evenings arrive a little earlier each day. Leaves quietly prepare for autumn. For the miller, this is the busiest season of all. Harvest time. Months of patient work in the fields finally arrive at their conclusion. Every family brings grain to the mill. Sometimes several generations arrive together. Grandparents, parents, children. Everyone helps unload the precious sacks. The road outside becomes crowded. Wagons wait patiently in line. Horses stamp their feet. Dogs weave between carts, hoping someone drops a morsel of food. Voices fill the air from sunrise until dusk. The mill rarely rests. The apprentice no longer counts the sacks. There are too many. Lift, carry, pour, sweep, repeat, again, and again, and again. The millstones seem to turn without pause. The water wheel hardly slows. Some evenings the miller continues working by candlelight simply because there is still grain waiting to be ground. Autumn brings prosperity if the harvest has been good. It also brings exhaustion. Every aching muscle reminds the miller that successful seasons often demand the hardest work. Finally, winter arrives. Perhaps quietly. Perhaps with sudden icy winds sweeping across the valley. The stream changes once more. Thin sheets of ice appear along its edges. Morning frost coats the wheel. The wooden paddles become dangerously slippery. Before beginning work each day, the miller must inspect everything carefully. Ice has remarkable strength. Water that freezes inside tiny cracks slowly forces them wider. Wood suffers. Stone suffers. Even iron is not entirely immune. The apprentice carries buckets of warm water to thaw frozen mechanisms. Slowly, patiently. Nothing can be rushed. Sometimes the wheel refuses to move at all. The entire village waits while the miller chips away at stubborn ice using wooden mallets and iron tools. Cold fingers quickly lose their feeling. Breath forms white clouds in the air. Every task takes longer. Even simple knots become difficult when hands grow numb. Yet life continues. People still need flour. Bread must still be baked. Children still become hungry. Winter does not pause ordinary responsibilities. Neither can the miller. As another year quietly completes its circle, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The miller's greatest employer is not the village lord, nor the farmers, nor even the church. It is the changing seasons themselves. Spring commands him to watch the floods. Summer demands patience with shrinking streams. Autumn overwhelms him with endless work. Winter tests both his skill and his endurance. And through every season, the wheel continues turning. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, always faithfully. Much like the miller himself. As another season quietly passes, you might begin to wonder something rather curious. If the miller worked harder than almost anyone else, if nearly every family depended upon him, if bread itself began with his labor, then surely he must have been one of the most admired people in the village. Strangely enough, not always. In fact, the medieval miller occupied one of the most unusual positions in village society. He was respected, needed, relied upon, and, at exactly the same time, frequently distrusted. It is one of history's quieter little contradictions. To understand why, imagine bringing your entire year's harvest to someone else. Not just a few bags from the supermarket. Everything. The food that would feed your family through the coming winter. The grain that represented months of work beneath the sun. The crop that determined whether your children would eat comfortably or sparingly. Now imagine handing those sacks to another person and watching them disappear into a building. Several hours later, flour emerges. But how can you be absolutely certain that every handful belongs to you? You cannot. Not completely. And that tiny uncertainty followed millers for centuries. Most mills operated under what was known as a milling fee. Rather than paying with coins, many farmers paid the miller with a small portion of the grain itself. This was perfectly normal. It was also necessary. The miller had a family to feed. The machinery needed constant repairs. Wood had to be replaced. Iron fittings had to be purchased from the blacksmith. Millstones eventually wore smooth and required dressing or replacement. The mill did not operate for free. Still, human beings have always been wonderfully suspicious when someone else measures their property. If a sack seemed slightly lighter than expected, the farmer frowned. If flour appeared coarser than usual, questions followed. If mice had eaten grain while it was stored at home, the miller sometimes received the blame anyway. It was easier to suspect another person than to admit that a hungry rat had enjoyed a particularly successful winter. Stories spread quickly in villages. They always have. One neighbor whispers to another. Someone repeats the tale at the well. Another retells it while waiting outside the blacksmith's forge. By evening, a simple misunderstanding has become an impressive scandal. According to the newest version of events, the miller has secretly stolen enough grain to feed an army. Reality is usually much less exciting. Fortunately, the miller himself seems almost amused by these rumors. Not because they help his reputation, because they are hardly new. His father heard them. His grandfather probably heard them. Perhaps his great-grandfather sighed at the very same accusations. Some occupations collect stories the way old coats collect dust. The miller's trade is certainly one of them. As another season quietly passes, you might begin to wonder something rather curious. If the miller worked harder than almost anyone else, if nearly every family depended upon him, if bread itself began with his labor, then surely he must have been one of the most admired people in the village. Strangely enough, not always. In fact, the medieval miller occupied one of the most unusual positions in village society. He was respected, needed, relied upon, and, at exactly the same time, frequently distrusted. It is one of history's quieter little contradictions. To understand why, imagine bringing your entire year's harvest to someone else. Not just a few bags from the supermarket. Everything. The food that would feed your family through the coming winter. The grain that represented months of work beneath the sun. The crop that determined whether your children would eat comfortably or sparingly. Now imagine handing those sacks to another person and watching them disappear into a building. Several hours later, flour emerges. But how can you be absolutely certain that every handful belongs to you? You cannot. Not completely. And that tiny uncertainty followed millers for centuries. Most mills operated under what was known as a milling fee. Rather than paying with coins, many farmers paid the miller with a small portion of the grain itself. This was perfectly normal. It was also necessary. The miller had a family to feed. The machinery needed constant repairs. Wood had to be replaced. Iron fittings had to be purchased from the blacksmith. Millstones eventually wore smooth and required dressing or replacement. The mill did not operate for free. Still, human beings have always been wonderfully suspicious when someone else measures their property. If a sack seemed slightly lighter than expected, the farmer frowned. If flour appeared coarser than usual, questions followed. If mice had eaten grain while it was stored at home, the miller sometimes received the blame anyway. It was easier to suspect another person than to admit that a hungry rat had enjoyed a particularly successful winter. Stories spread quickly in villages. They always have. One neighbor whispers to another. Someone repeats the tale at the well. Another retells it while waiting outside the blacksmith's forge. By evening, a simple misunderstanding has become an impressive scandal. According to the newest version of events, the miller has secretly stolen enough grain to feed an army. Reality is usually much less exciting. Fortunately, the miller himself seems almost amused by these rumors. Not because they help his reputation, because they are hardly new. His father heard them. His grandfather probably heard them. Perhaps his great-grandfather sighed at the very same accusations. Some occupations collect stories the way old coats collect dust. The miller's trade is certainly one of them. Medieval literature often enjoyed making jokes about millers. Traveling entertainers told humorous tales in village squares. Poets occasionally described millers as clever tricksters. Storytellers loved exaggeration. A perfectly honest miller rarely made for an entertaining performance. A mischievous one, however, that sold more stories. Much as dramatic headlines often attract attention today. The apprentice asks one evening, while sweeping flour from beneath the millstones, "Why do people think millers are dishonest?" The older man pauses before answering. He leans against one of the great wooden beams and smiles quietly. Because, he says, they cannot watch every grain. The apprentice considers this. The answer makes surprising sense. Suspicion often grows wherever work becomes difficult to observe. Inside the mill, grain disappears. Flour appears. Everything happens between those two moments. That leaves plenty of room for imagination. The miller shrugs. If you do your work honestly long enough. He brushes flour from his sleeve. The people who truly know you stop listening to rumors. It is wise advice. Perhaps timeless advice. Outside, another customer approaches. He is older than most. His beard is almost entirely white. He has visited this mill for decades. Without a word, he unloads his grain. The miller nods. No careful counting. No anxious watching. Trust has grown slowly between them. Not through speeches. Not through promises. Through years. Perhaps 20. Perhaps 30. That kind of trust cannot be hurried. Nearby, however, a younger farmer watches every movement with remarkable attention. He counts the sacks. He studies the scales. He even peers into the hopper where grain begins its journey toward the stones. The miller notices. Of course he notices. He says nothing. Everyone must learn confidence at their own pace. When the flour is finished, the young farmer measures it carefully. After several moments, he nods with quiet satisfaction. Everything appears fair. He thanks the miller politely before beginning the long walk home. Perhaps next year he will worry a little less. Perhaps not. Human nature enjoys consistency. Despite the occasional suspicion, the miller often lives slightly more comfortably than many of his neighbors. Not extravagantly. No grand mansion appears beside the stream. No servants polish silver cutlery. Nothing so dramatic. But the steady milling fees provide a more reliable income than farming alone. Farmers gamble each year against weather. The miller gambles mostly against broken machinery. Both risks are real, yet they are different. As a result, the miller's cottage may have a few small comforts. Perhaps an extra blanket during winter. A slightly larger cooking pot. A stronger roof repaired before it begins leaking badly. Maybe even a second pair of boots. These are modest improvements. But in the medieval world, modest improvements matter enormously. Comfort often arrives one small object at a time. A better stool. A sharper knife. A sturdier door. None seem exciting individually. Together, they make life noticeably easier. Visitors sometimes mistake these small comforts for wealth. Real wealth looks very different. Real wealth belongs to great lords with stone castles. Powerful bishops with vast estates. Successful merchants trading across seas. Compared to them, the miller remains an ordinary working man. He simply happens to perform an essential service. One autumn afternoon, while several farmers wait for their grain, conversation turns toward the lord of the manor. Taxes, naturally. Taxes appear in conversations throughout history with remarkable enthusiasm. Someone sighs heavily. Another rolls his eyes. A third remarks that taxes somehow never seem to become smaller. Several people laugh. The miller laughs too. Not because taxes amuse him. Because complaining together has always been one of humanity's favorite forms of entertainment. For a few moments, everyone is equal. The richest farmer. The poorest laborer. The apprentice. The miller. Each has something to say about obligations owed to someone else. The water wheel turns quietly beside them. Completely indifferent to politics. Water has no opinion regarding taxes. It simply keeps flowing. As evening approaches, the waiting crowd gradually disappears. One by one, neighbors shoulder their fresh flour and begin the familiar walk home. Many pause to wish the miller a good evening. Some thank him. Others simply wave. small gestures, easy to overlook. Yet they reveal something important. Despite every rumor, despite every old joke, despite centuries of stories suggesting otherwise, the village keeps returning. Again, and again, and again. Because when winter draws near, when bread must be baked, when children are hungry, trust is built less upon stories, and far more upon the quiet certainty that tomorrow morning the miller's wheel will still be turning, just as it did yesterday, just as it does today, and, with a little luck, just as it will tomorrow.